Maria Goretti showed herself to be such a one no less in her life than in her martyrdom. Shall we then class her with Agnes and Cecilia, Catherine of Siena, and Therese of the Little Child Jesus, and many others who, with heroic abnegation and the blessings of their virginity, wore the nuptial ring that bound them to their heavenly spouse? But Maria Goretti was only a child, and there is no reason for asserting that she would have consecrated herself to the Lord by the vow of virginity. Yet Christ knew well that he had chosen her for his own. Without thought of the future, she had given herself entirely to him in her heart. She desired but one thing: fidelity to Christ at any price, even at the cost of her life. Never for anything in the world would she violate the divine law. St.Maria Goretti was born in Corinaldo, Italy, on October 16, 1890. She was the third of 7 children of a farming family, Luigi and Assunta Goretti. When Maria was 6 years old, her father, Luigi, decided to follow his neighbors, the Cimarellis, to Nettuno. With only a vague plan in mind, the Gorellis and the Cimarellis wandered about the city of Nettuno, trying to find a place to stay. Soon, after many inquiries and prayers, they learned of a Count Mazzolini who rented out a rich farming ground on a profit-sharing business. They found a vacant building that used to be a cheese factory, and after making arrangements with the Count, they moved in. The Cimarellis moved into the house adjacent to them. It is because of Teresa Cimarelli, who was Assunta's childhood friend, that we know so much about Maria today. When asked about Maria Goretti years later, she said, "Madonna mia, I used to see her every day as she passed by the door to get water from the well, but she never stopped. She was a serious girl. She came and went quickly and busily, and there was no reproach when we nicknamed her the little old lady. Maria was always modest and reserved. We all liked her, and deep down we admired her. She was more religious than the rest of us. I was just a girl then, and would that I had followed her example. But at that age, most of us are senseless. We scarcely know what we are doing. We seek pleasure and popularity. We permit ourselves to be distracted from better things." Assunta took control of the house with cleaning, and Luigi took control of the land. He worked all day throughout the summer, fall, and winter. The land was rough and the air was damp and unhealthy due to the nearby marshes. Soon Luigi was coughing every day and fighting off small fevers. But he continued to press on, trying hard to get the land to produce for his family. By harvest time, Luigi was dragging. To save money, he was trying to bring the harvest in on his own, but his health would not let him. When the Count came to check on the harvest, he was not happy to see so much work left to do. He insisted on hiring 2 men who were looking for work, a father and son by the name of Serenelli. It was agreed that the 2 families would share the old cheese factory together to save on money, and that the profit would be split. Assunta wasn't excited about feeding 2 more mouths, but she didn't complain. At first, everything went well, and it seemed that the addition of the Serenelli family was a good idea. Mr. Serenelli was agreeable, and his 18-year-old son, Alessandro, got along with the children well. He taught them how to catch birds and make reed whistles. Work got caught up, and soon sheaves of wheat piled up in the barn. But then winter set in, and time hung heavy on their hands. Mr. Serenelli took to drinking and was difficult to be around. Alessandro, too, began to change. He no longer played with the children and isolated himself. One day, when Assunta was cleaning Alessandro's room, she discovered clippings of immodest magazine pictures that were hung on the wall surrounding the bed. She wanted to take them down, but she hesitated. Already the 2 families weren't getting along so well anymore, and she didn't want to start a fight. So she didn't say anything about it to anyone, not even to Luigi, but she would keep an eye on Alessandro. To make things worse, Luigi noticed that Mr. Serenelli was stealing some grain from his pile. When confronted, harsh words were exchanged. Luigi gave in and let it go, feeling weak from the malaria that had set in. He knew their situation wasn't good and wished they could go back to their home in the mountains. Luigi worked until he could work no more. By the end of April, he was in bed for good and a priest was called. He lay dying, and then, as if looking into the future, he said to Assunta, "Assunta, go back to Coronaldo." He repeated this twice with urgency. Some thought he was delirious, but soon Assunta would understand their significance. At 11 years old, Maria began to desire to make her first Holy Communion. At that time, children didn't usually make their first communion until the age of 12, but God knew what was coming and wanted Maria to have Holy Communion to prepare herself for what was ahead. After some obstacles, such as time, distance, and the fact that Maria couldn't read since she didn't go to school, it was decided that after the housework was done, Maria would walk the long miles down the road to the next town in Conca to receive instruction. And on Corpus Christi, Maria was able to go to confession and receive her first Holy Communion. Years later, Assunta would say, "My Maria made her first Holy Communion like a saint." Assunta had hoped to return to Coronaldo as Luigi had asked, but with no money and her oldest being only 13, it was impossible. Instead, she took to the fields with Alessandro, and Maria took over the household. Overnight, she seemed to have changed from a laughing little girl to a serious young woman. However, she enjoyed helping her mother around the house and taking care of the younger children. On the weekends, she would walk with her neighbor, Teresa Serenelli, to the market, where they would have long talks, and some of her former gaiety would return. She always said her daily rosary, and she and Teresa Cimarelli would often stop on their way to town at the shrine of Our Lady of Grace. Maria always said an extra rosary for her father's soul and a Hail Mary every time she passed the graveyard. But one day, Maria took her mother's place in the fields, while her mother worked in the house. She worked alongside Alessandro, who suddenly threw down his hoe and grabbed her by the arms. Shaken, Maria didn't understand what he was saying until it finally dawned on her what he wanted. Yanking herself away, she ran away to the barn, where she hid in a large pile of hay and stayed motionless for 3 hours. For a whole week, she avoided being left alone with him. But then he had snuck up on her one morning while she was making the beds. He again grabbed her, and she screamed and raked her hands over his face until he let her go. She was about to run for help, but he stopped her, saying, "If you say anything to your mother, I will kill you." Maria had been too afraid to leave the bedroom, and she was late starting the evening meal. Her mother, tired from the work in the fields, scolded her for her negligence, while Alessandro laughed. From then on, Maria lived in silence and fear. She thought about telling her mother a few times, but Alessandro's threat rang fresh in her ears. Besides that, it would only cause trouble for her mother, and they would probably get thrown out, so Maria stayed silent and aware. She, who used to not be afraid of hardly anything, now was on the alert of Alessandro's every movement. She avoided being alone with him and avoided eye contact. She became silent and withdrawn, and her prayers longer and longer. At night, she would cry herself to sleep. Not too long after this, Alessandro hatched a plan to get Maria alone. While everyone was working in the fields, he asked Maria to mend a shirt for him. He knew that Maria would be alone in the house, watching over her baby sister, Teresa. At his request, Maria stiffened, but took the shirt from him. Then he disappeared with the others to work in the fields. After a few hours of work, he told Assunta he forgot his handkerchief in his room, and she should take his place. Back at the house, Maria was sitting outside on the porch since it was so hot inside. Suddenly, she saw Alessandro enter the house and go straight to the bedroom, where she heard him rummaging through a drawer. Nervously, she waited for him to leave, but then he commanded her to come to him. Maria froze in place, not wanting to move. Again he called her, and then grabbed her by the arm. Maria grabbed the banister, calling for help, but he yanked her hard and dragged her inside. Once inside, he locked the door and faced Maria with a knife. Maria said,
"No, Alessandro, no!"
and began to run around the table for protection. He caught up with her easily and threw her to the floor, pinning her down, holding the knife over her chest. He ordered her to give in to him, to stop fighting him, but Maria yelled,
"No, it is a sin. God does not want it. If you do this, you will go to hell, Alessandro."
Her complete refusal made something in Alessandro snap. With a mad rage, he began to stab her multiple times, in her chest, abdomen, and back. Later, he said, "It was like I was pounding corn, like sticking a knife into a log." Throughout the stabbing, Maria kept pleading to Alessandro to stop and that God did not want this. And then she lost consciousness. Thinking that he had killed her, Alessandro threw the knife in the closet and went in the bedroom and locked the door. It was Luigi who found Maria lying on the floor. He had heard the baby crying, but he also heard Maria calling in a feeble voice for help. He had been taking a nap under the tree. When he went to check on her, she was standing at the door, but collapsed. He yelled frantically for Assunta, who came running, along with her brothers, who also heard the call. When Assunta saw Maria lying on the floor in a pool of blood, she fell fainting to the floor. Their neighbors, the Cimarellis, also heard the commotion and had come running. Once they realized what happened, Domenico Cimarelli went running for the doctor. As he ran, he shouted to the other neighbors, "Crime at the old cheese factory! Maria attacked!" Soon, farmers and townspeople showed up at the old cheese factory, armed with various weapons of clubs or guns. Women fretted over Maria. Men asked endless questions. But all Maria wanted was to be left alone with her mother. She begged the people to please go, but no one listened. They all felt they had a reason to stay. Someone found the knife that Alessandro used thrown in the closet. It was then they realized his bedroom door was locked. The men got angry and began to cause a ruckus, pounding on the door. The Count, who had also heard of the crisis and had come, stopped the men from knocking the door down. "No, wait, let's notify the police. They'll come and arrest him." He was worried that the angry men would add murder to murder. 2 farmers rushed off to find the police. It wasn't until the doctor finally arrived that everybody finally left, and this was only because he had to force them to go. Maria was still lying on the bed where she had been carefully placed, and she was exhausted. Her mother undid Maria's clothing, and they found 1 slash mark on her breast near the heart, 4 gashes crisscrossed on the stomach, and more on her back. In total, she had been stabbed 14 times. The doctor knew she would need surgery and sent someone to run for an ambulance, and in the meantime, Assunta asked Maria what happened. Maria answered quietly,
"It was Alessandro, Mama."
"Alessandro, but why?" Maria was quiet for a moment and then said,
"Because he wanted to commit an awful sin, and I would not."
The horse-drawn ambulance finally arrived at 6 o'clock. Maria had been bleeding since 2 o'clock. Wrapping her up in a bedsheet as a makeshift bandage, they carried her to the ambulance where neighbors had been waiting outside. They gathered around the ambulance to get a glimpse of Maria. Her brothers and sisters climbed in quickly to give Maria one last kiss, and Maria tried to smile at everyone. Assunta stayed in the back with her, and finally they were off for their 7-mile journey to the hospital. The road was very rough, and every bump and rattle was felt, but Maria didn't complain. Assunta asked her, "Are you suffering, my little one?" Maria smiled bravely and said,
"Yes, Mama. A little. Do we have far to go?"
On their way to the hospital, Assunta caught sight of 2 police officers leading a man in handcuffs on foot. With a start, she recognized the man as Alessandro. She was thankful Maria hadn't seen him, and she was thankful that he was caught. At the hospital, throngs of people waited for the little heroine. They had heard already of the drama that unfolded and wanted to see the little victim. Maria tried to smile at the strangers staring at her. Immediately, they did surgery. Maria had to stay awake for the whole thing, as the surgeon feared peritonitis. In spite of the stitching and bandaging, she remained calm, invoking the name of the Blessed Virgin. Then, mercifully, she lost consciousness. During the operation, they found the intestines torn, the lungs completely pierced through, and the heart grazed. The lower bone structure showed serious damage, with 5 minor gashes that required stitching. They bandaged her up tightly in a body cast. When she awoke, she felt much better and asked for water. But this too was denied to her. Instead of being upset, she offered this up, remembering Jesus' thirst on the cross for her. Towards 10 o'clock that night, she slipped into a coma-like sleep. She moaned continuously during the night. At some point, she heard her mother leave, due to the doctor's prompting. She wanted her mother nearby, but she offered this up too. Through the night, spasms of pain racked her body, preventing sleep. Her wounds were like hot coals in her body. Finally, around 5 o'clock in the morning, she fell into a light sleep. In the morning, Assunta returned with the priest. Maria was able to smile and asked how her brothers and sisters were. She mentioned that she would like to see them. The priest offered Maria Holy Communion, much to her joy. Before giving Maria communion, he had to ask a question. This question was a hard one to ask, for it brought so much pain. Do you forgive your attacker? Maria thought for a moment in reflection. She wanted her answer to be sincere and honest. Did she forgive Alessandro? Did she forgive him for not only taking her life, but for all his previous advances as well? Could she forgive him for stalking her like an animal, for his selfish and lustful thoughts, for no regard how she felt, or what this did to her? She thought back to the moment of the attack and the pleas she made to Alessandro to stop.
No, Alessandro, you must not do it. It is a sin. God does not want it. You will go to hell.
She had meant it then, and she meant it now. She was concerned not only for her own safety in safeguarding her purity, but protecting his soul as well. She truly did not want him in hell. Turning back to the priest, she said fervently,
Yes, for the love of Jesus, I too pardon him, and I want him to be with me in heaven.
Tears were running down Assunta's face, and the priest wiped some away as well as he gave Maria communion. Later that morning, they redressed Maria's wounds. This caused great pain, as great big violet scabs were formed around the wounds. Bruises on Maria's knees, legs, and elbows showed how hard Maria had fought to keep her purity. The police officer came to get a report, and afterwards, Assunta had to ask again about the attack, because something had been troubling her. Did he try this before?
Yes, Mama. 2 other times.
But why didn't you tell me about it?
Because he said he would kill me if I did. And you see, he killed me anyway.
Throughout the day, Maria's respirations were failing. She was given extreme unction, but she now fell into a delirious sleep. Over and over, she seemed to be reliving her attack by Alessandro as she screamed,
No, Alessandro, you will go to hell! Mama!
In her calmer moments, her mind seemed preoccupied with other things, other duties that she had been in the middle of when the attack happened. She suddenly remembered she had left her baby sister on the steps outside.
Teresa!
She was reassured her baby sister was at home, safe and sound. Near 3 o'clock, she went through her last agony as spasms racked her entire body. During the last spasm, it caused her whole body to throw itself back, and with that, she gave one last gasp, and then nothing. She died at 11 years old, just a few months shy of her 12th birthday. It was July 6, 1902, Feast of the Precious Blood. The day of Maria's burial, everyone seemed to know they had lived among a saint. Teresa Cimarelli says, the whole populace of Nettuno accompanied the body to the cemetery. Her mother came as well, but didn't stay long. She eventually returned herself and the children back to Coronaldo. You understand, she could no longer live in the house that held such sad memories. Old Serenelli disappeared too. No one ever heard of him again. Alessandro was imprisoned and was on trial for the murder of Maria Goretti. At first, he used his mother and brother's mental illnesses as his own as well, claiming insanity. But after the doctors examined him, it was determined he was responsible for his own actions. He was sent to the penitentiary of Noto in Sicily. At first, he seemed happy and in his own world, believing he was the victim of a great misunderstanding, and that it would only be a matter of time until he was let out. He even made up a song he would sing as he was walking around. Take courage, Serenelli, banish your fears, you'll soon be welcomed home with cheers. It wasn't until a priest tried to talk to him that he showed his real feelings. He yelled at the priest saying, "It's all your fault I lost her, you and your teachings." The priest tried to reason with him, but Alessandro became violent and lunged at the priest. The guards dragged Alessandro away, and the priest said, "Alessandro, one day you will want me. Maria will see to that." Alessandro spewed hatred, but the priest's words stayed with him. In the days that followed, he grew restless and edgy and couldn't sleep. Somehow, he knew something life-altering was going to happen, and he wasn't sure if he was going to like it. And then one night, it happened. He was sleeping fitfully in his cell when he was awakened by Maria. After screaming for the guards, he tells in his own words what happened. I saw her. I saw Maria dressed in a dazzling white, gathering beautiful lilies in a garden and handing it to me. As I took them from her outstretched hands, they were transformed into small lights that glowed like candles. You've got to get me a priest. Get me a priest. The guards just laughed and said, Write to the priest if you have something to say. Immediately, Alessandro fell to his knees and scrawled on the floor, I am deeply sorry for what has happened. I have taken the life of an innocent girl whose one aim was to save her purity, shedding her blood rather than give in to my sinful desires. I publicly retract the evil I have done and beg pardon of God and the stricken family. One hope that encourages me, that I may also one day obtain God's pardon, as so many others have. Alessandro Serenelli, November 10th, 1910. Now the story of Alessandro's conversion and confession spread throughout the countryside and town. Soon, people began to make pilgrimages to Maria's tomb, and many prayers were answered, as well as miracles. One little boy, who was sick and wasted away from consumption, was brought to Maria's grave by his mother. After praying for a cure, the little boy left looking normal and completely well. After serving 35 years, Alessandro was freed. The first place he went to was to Assunta's doorstep. Now an old woman, she opened the door and was more than surprised to see her daughter's murderer on the doorstep, on his knees, hat in his hands, begging her forgiveness. Today, many people would take the pleasure in withholding their forgiveness, but Assunta said, My Maria forgave you, Alessandro, so how could I possibly refuse? They developed a deep friendship, and the relationship was almost like that of mother and son. The day after Assunta forgave him, he accompanied her to church, and to the shock of everyone, he confessed his sin and asked for pardon. Soon afterwards, he worked as a gardener at a Capuchin monastery. It's said that lilies were his favorite flower. Eventually, he was accepted as a religious brother. In 1950, Alessandro and Assunta attended Maria's canonization together. It is the first time that a murderer of a saint has been present at a canonization ceremony along with the mother. Alessandro Serenelli died a holy death at the age of 87 after becoming bedridden from falling down the stairs and breaking his femur. No doubt Maria came for him to guide him to the heaven they both fought for.